Hi everyone. I'm here to do another installment of the Opening of the Key series um, that I started a little while back. Excuse me. And today, in this video, I'd like to talk about card counting and pairing, which are basically the only two skills um, you really need besides the elemental dignities part. That, of course, is very important too. These are the last sort of general techniques with which you will read the entire 5-operation opening of the key, or whatever operation you choose to do. Um, so essentially, every card has a certain value. Let's talk about card counting first. Whenever you've got a string, that's essentially what you're making in this spread. You're making a series of strings, we call them. And originally in the 18th and 19th centuries, most spreads were constructed this way. They were read very linearly, but card by card by card. And you sort of got an overload of information, and the chronology of the whole thing was really skewed, really difficult to interpret. So what the Golden Dawn did to sort of simplify that and make it a little more, I suppose, a little more usable, user-friendly in general, was to impose upon that, reading across the line narrative, impose upon that a set of rules so that you wouldn't have to read all of the information in the spread, and you would get basically what the universe is trying to tell you is the highlights, basically the main points. So in some ways you would think that you get a relatively abridged version of the story, but it's really not true. You actually still get a tremendous amount of information, and nothing is really preventing you from reading the entire string. I mean, if you really want to, you still can. Um, and usually to do that, we would read from whatever card is the top card left, going right to left. And I only do that because that's how you read Hebrew. You read Hebrew right to left. And, my Kabbalistic people in the Golden Dawn were obsessed with keeping things like that. So, and some people advocate doing that. You can read left to right, honestly, if you want to. It's really up to you. Um, okay, so for card counting, um, so each card has a value, and basically what you do is you've got your string, right, and you've got your significator somewhere in that string. That's why you're reading that particular pile in whatever particular spread you're using, whichever spread you're on, 1 through 5. So you find your significator, and traditionally you start with a significator. You can also, Paul Hughes Barlow at supertarot.co.uk does all sorts of wonky stuff with this spread that is very a-traditional. It is not, what he does is very much something he came up with himself, and it's sort of his technique that he's been sharing with people. And it is effective, but I found it a little bit overwhelming, because he really only has you read the first spread instead of reading the entire 5 spreads, and makes you look for so much information in those spreads that it really takes some nuance to really be able to read that way, I think. But the traditional way of doing it is really just card counting from the significator. And so that significator is most likely going to be a court card. That's usually what we use. And the court card, of course, represents the querent's personality. Crowley advises using personality as a guide and not appearance like you would traditionally. But if the spirit moves you to do appearance, you may. So you start from there. Now, each card, as I keep saying, has a value. So let's just go through each set of cards and their values. And I use Crowley's system of counting, and that's really only relevant for the aces. But anyway, so we'll start off with the 3 mother letters of the trumps. So some of these numbers come from their attributions and just like their Hebrew stuff. Anywho, okay, so the 3 mother letters are, of course, Aleph, the Fool, Mem. Nope, that is not mem. Mem, and this is sheen. Okay, so the Fool, the Hanged Man, and the Aeon, or Judgment. Sorry. These three cards, from these cards you only count 3. And when you count, you include the card itself. That is the first one that is numbered 1. So let's say this was my string, and I was counting from the Fool. The Fool gets 3 counts, because it's a mother letter, and you go 1, 2, 3, and then you would end at this card, okay? So what this does is that sort of gives you the sequence of events, and then you interpret that event based on the elemental dignity rules and the triad that it constitutes. So again, these have a value of 3, okay? Now the next set of trumps are the, let's do the planetary trumps next. The planetary trumps are, of course, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, etc. So we've got the universe, or the world, which is Saturn. Fortune, Jupiter. The Empress, Venus. And of course these all have their astrological symbols somewhere on this bottom part. The Priestess is the Moon. Oh, that is not... Sorry, doing this backwards is sort of awkward. The Tower is Mars. The Sun is obviously the Sun, and the Magus is Mercury. Okay, so for these you're going to count 9. Okay, 9 for these. So again, you would start at the card, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, alright, etc. So then the last set of trumps are the astrological, the zodiacal trumps. And of course these are the signs of the zodiac. So I don't have these in any order, I just sort of separated them. For these you're going to count 12, okay, because there are 12 signs of the zodiac. And of course these are, or Temperance is Sagittarius, the stars Aquarius, Death is Scorpio, the Lovers is Gemini, the Chariot is Cancer, the Moon is Pisces, the Devil is Capricorn, Lust or Strength is Leo the Lion, the Hierophant is Taurus, the Hermit is Virgo, the Emperor is Aries, and Adjustment is Libra. Okay, relatively self-explanatory. And so for those, you're going to count 12. Okay. Now, the court cards start getting a little odd, but for all the courts except for the princesses or pages, whatever, you're going to count 4. Okay, so obviously these are our court cards minus the princesses, and so these are knights, queens, and princes, or alternatively kings, queens, and knights, depending on what style you're using. For Crowley, it's knights, queens, princes. For these guys, you will always count 4. Now, the curious thing about these, of course, because this is where we're starting from, right? We're starting from our significator, which is a court card. There's always a question of direction as to which direction to count towards. Now, traditionally, the Golden Dawn tells us that we should do it in the direction that the card itself is facing, meaning based on the artwork. But, for instance, like the Knight of Wands would clearly go, mirroring again, this way, in the direction he's facing. However, not all of them are that obvious, as we know. The Prince of Discs is sort of turning to one side, but that's sort of unclear. The Queen of Cups is totally indiscernible. So it's sort of ambiguous. So what Paul Hughes Barlow suggests, and I do agree with because it simplifies the process, is for the female characters, in other words, the queens and the princesses, count clockwise towards the right. Okay, clockwise for the women, and for male characters, anti-clockwise towards the left. Okay, and this he determines based on the Kabbalistic placement of the court cards. The knights or kings, of course, are in Chokhmah, and he says Chokhmah's influence goes towards the left, and the queens are in Binah, and Binah's influence goes towards the right, and so there is a Kabbalistically sound reason for that. Okay, so for those you will count 4. Now for the princesses, you will count 7, actually, which is sort of odd, but that is... My cat is Kofi! Sorry, this is what I deal with on a daily basis. Okay, so the princesses, you will count 7 in the clockwise direction. Okay. The other thing that sort of throws a wrench in this is if you use reversals in this spread. I do not use reversals and get along just fine. In life, I don't use reversals. I think they're sort of pointless. That's just my opinion. I don't disagree that they can be very useful for certain people, but for me, they just confuse the hell out of me, and I personally, I don't need them. But if you do choose to use reversals in this spread, usually that reverses the direction. So if you have a reversed queen, for instance, you would not count clockwise, you would count anti-clockwise. Okay? So that's pretty confusing there too. And that applies for all of them. Whenever it's reversed, you would supposedly count in the opposite direction than you would normally, okay? But that's sort of irrelevant. I wouldn't worry about that. I think adding reversals to the spread, it's complicated enough. You don't really need to do that. Now now we're going to start the minor. Anywho, you're going to have to listen to my phone for 5 seconds. I apologize. The 4 aces, according to Crowley, get counted for 11. And this has to do with stuff in the Book of the Law, blah, blah, blah. But without getting into that, these you count 11. Okay? Oh, God. Hello? Hi, I'm trying to make a YouTube video. I'm busy. What? What do you need? Yes. Bye. I'm very sorry. The other thing is when you're doing this directly on YouTube, you can't pause it, which really frustrates me. You cannot pause your recording. You have to just go straight through. And since I'm already almost done, I didn't want to just stop this and start over. So I apologize. That was my mother, as usual. Okay, so the minors, the rest of these are the easiest. You just count whatever number it is. So for all the 4s, you count 4. For all the 8s, you count 8, etc., etc. 3s, count 3. Alright, that's very self-explanatory. Now the last thing I want to talk about is card pairing. That will take 1 minute. Card pairing is just when you have your string and you pair from the ends towards the middle. And the rules of elemental dignities still apply to these. So if you have, you know, an earth card on one end and an air card on the other end, they technically cancel each other out. And so that detail is sort of in the background, not really all that relevant. And let's say the next pairing is earth and fire, then that one is a more neutral pairing. It's something there, but there's a sort of ambivalence or indifference between those two energies. The next pairing, let's say, is air and fire. That's a really strong combination. That's something that's really obvious, etc. Earth and water would also be really strong. Just the Elemental Dignities video is also in my channel, so be sure to review those rules before you do this. And that's about it. Paul also writes, because I've read his book, and among other things, and he says you can pair from any card. You may. That's also sometimes helpful. And that basically fills in all the details that card counting didn't give you. You stop counting when you hit a card that you have already hit before. Okay, that's when you know to stop. Before then, you just keep going. Okay, if you have any questions or if anything is unclear, I sort of do these videos on the fly, but please let me know. Send me a message or a comment, okay? Thank you very much. Stay cool.